The following program addresses a topic which may be triggering to certain viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome to An Hour to Give. I'm Sam Laprade. As you know, on this show, we talk about so many different subjects, so many different organizations in our community that are making an impact. We speak about community, philanthropy, and volunteerism, and well, today is no different. But today is a challenging subject. It's a subject that you may have never heard of before. And I'll be honest with you, until I met Nancy Morris, I'd never heard of it either. It does affect many members of our community. Siblings 2 is an organization that Nancy founded, and she is the bravest woman I know. And she joins me now. Hi, Nancy. How are you?
I'm good, Sam. How are you?
So, Nancy, I got to meet you, and we couldn't stop talking. We were like, and what about this? And what about this? And what about this? Because you do so much in the community. So give us a sense of what you do in your life.
Well, my 9 to 5, my money earner is as a business psychologist, working with organizations, helping them to find ways to improve sort of motivation and performance outcomes. I tend to work with knowledge workers like lawyers and accountants and those, but I've worked with real estate agents and community members. I've worked with not-for-profits and charities, not only here in Ottawa, but all across Canada. And I used to be in the UK, so I worked with them in the UK as well.
Amazing. And we've seen you on TV before. You've talked about sort of this side of your life, but today is very different.
Completely and utterly different, yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a subject that, as you said, many people have probably not heard of, or they've heard it under different terms, because there's a number of different terms for sibling sexual abuse, which is what we're talking about today. And that in and of itself has caused people some confusion and difficulty in understanding the subject.
So let's start right there. What is sibling sexual abuse?
Well, starting right there is great, but it's also problematic because how people define sibling sexual abuse is sort of all over the map. But sibling sexual abuse, there's about 20 some odd different definitions, but one that we tend to land on is where there's sexual contact that's not appropriate, that's occurring with people who are defined as siblings, and even that term has its problems because we are also including half siblings, foster siblings, people who live in a home but would define themselves as siblings. So but it makes it distinct from child to child outside of two houses, like peer-to-peer type sexual assault, which is another conversation. So it's really about siblings living together in the same environment, whether they're full-blooded siblings or some other derivative of that. And so we start with the sibling part, that's the definition we have. The sexual part, again, is we get into a minefield of definitions because, when we use that term and we're talking about children, yes, we might talk about what people classify as sex and sexual intercourse and things like that. But in this context, we're also talking about behavior that goes beyond normal curiosity between children, but might be not as, it's not about sex per se. It's more exposure, or fondling or things like that. So the sexual part is the whole range of behaviors that go from normal or normative through problematic or inappropriate, all the way up to actual real sexual abuse, like what people tend to have in their pigeonhole of how they might define sexual abuse. And then the third word, abuse, is another word that's difficult because we don't want to define those who cause harm or those who perpetrate this behavior as abusers. Because again, society has a definition of abuser as somebody who's a predator, pedophile, violent, aggressive, and that's not the case. So right now in the world of research around sibling sexual abuse, there are a number of different research projects going on for language and things like that. But when we're talking about sibling sexual abuse, and when I talk about it on my podcast or with the people that I work with, I am referring to those young individuals who live within the same home more often than not, who are full-blooded siblings, foster, step, all the range, and there is inappropriate or severe sexual behavior that is occurring that is beyond normative curiosity, normal curiosity. So that's how, you can grab that as a pretty common way of describing it.
Really helpful to go through that. That was actually very helpful for me too, even though I feel like going into today I felt educated, but I feel even more educated now. Let me ask you this. One of the things I really want to pull the thread on is when you talk about really ensuring that we're not labeling as an abuser. Mm-hmm. I really want to touch on that because that is really important, because some children, I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, are not understanding this is not appropriate behavior.
Absolutely. The child who is causing the harm or perpetrating the harm, quite often we are talking 10 years old, 12 years old, 14 years old. They haven't, even younger, sometimes older, but even younger. There's a lot of research that's gone on about how actually one of the factors in sibling sexual abuse is brain development. So the young person is in other research, we don't think that people's brains are fully developed until they're in their 20s. Many would argue it's much later than that. But, so the people that we're talking about, brain development is likely a contributing factor because they don't understand what they're doing. They don't understand the consequences of what they're doing, not only to the person they're doing it to, but to themselves. Mm-hmm. So again, research shows that person who causes that behavior, as they grow up and as their brains develop, their morals develop more, their sense of consciousness develops more, they too feel quite debilitating guilt and shame about the behavior that they put on another person. So to label everybody who does this as an abuser really just shoves them underneath a rock, and they're not going to step forward and look for help. Whereas what we've seen in other jurisdictions, like in Australia, for example, they tend to take a public health approach to sibling sexual abuse and an education approach, which we'll probably touch on later. But, that is showing that, we all are on a course of development as children in all aspects of our lives, whether that's sort of brain development or social development or whatever, and sexual development. And so what they're seeing in Australia, and the way somebody there quoted it for me, is that children are going along this path of sexual development, normal sexual development, and for one reason or another, they come off that path and choose this type of behavior for one reason or another. And there's a myriad of reasons as to why they could do that. So then the role, instead of criminalizing or really labeling that person as if they were some adult predator, instead of doing that, we want to bring them back onto the path of appropriate sexual development. And that's why to label people who cause harm as abusers is really problematic, and it really limits the conversation. And what we're trying to do, even by coming here today, is open the conversation so that we can have everybody around the table to more fully understand that. It's the only way we can create prevention strategies and intervention strategies.
Well, I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about healthcare workers, I'm thinking about teachers, I'm thinking about parents, I'm thinking about the whole community, to be honest with you. Having this conversation today reminds me of many, many years ago when we started talking about Me Too.
Yes.
And that was a bit taboo. It was a bit, we shouldn't talk about these things in public. And so I think today, I'm going to get emotional saying this to you, I think you're breaking new ground today. I think today is a day where we say, this is a difficult conversation, but if we don't have it in the right scenarios, then a lot of people are having harm done.
Yep.
Not only the young person that is perpetrating this, but also young people that just never, ever, ever talk about it again.
Yep.
But of course they carry it, Nancy, for decades.
Do you know, I've done a research project for a number of years. It's currently closed, but I was collecting narratives from survivors, perpetrators, other family members, and others that have been impacted by this. And I've had people were leaving these anonymous stories on a particular portal that I had. And the number of people, one of the demographic questions was age. And they were 55, 60, 65, I was the first person they were telling.
Wow.
And a lot might have told a spouse, but never anybody within their family environment. And that's just so sad to me, because whilst that person may have had a wonderful life and all that sort of stuff, we all know, particularly me as a psychologist, it's sort of like, we want to live an authentic life and be able to share with people around us who we are, good, bad, and ugly. But when you're holding this back, then you're not able to express that, then there's that part of you that doesn't, and it's a big part. I'm a survivor of sibling sexual abuse. I was fortunate because 40 years ago, I began to talk about it with a therapist when I was just 20 years old. So, I've been on a path like this. I've met people who, like I say, who've never told anybody, and they're in their 50s and 60s. But I've also had people who perpetrated the harm, also never tell anybody. I know the story of a man who this was going to come out, that he had done this to his sister, and he killed himself. And why? He didn't understand when he was older, in his 30s and 40s, for example, that what he did when he was 12 was not necessarily because he was deviant or a predator. It was because something else was going on. And because he couldn't speak about it, he wasn't able to get the help that he needed.
And I want to get into your story. We have a whole hour together, and it's just you and I
know.
I'm so grateful for that. I want to just touch on something, and we're going to talk about so much today. I want to touch on the impact of social media, the impact of what's accessible on the internet. We don't need to say what that is. We all know what that is. All of those things have to be playing a role in the days of today.
It does, and I think some of the sort of websites that are available to children that aren't supposed to be available to children, but they see them anyway. Yeah. I interviewed a young man named Adam on the podcast, and he caused harm to his sister when he was like 12 and 13 years old, and she was 5 or 6. And one of the things that correlates with his behavior was because he got addicted to those visual images when he was like 9, because he was able to see them on another person's laptop sort of thing. And he got addicted at 9 years old, because of course that does all sorts of stuff to the brain of a 9-year-old. And although his parents acted very responsibly when they found out all these sorts of other things, it was still something that wasn't fully managed, and therefore he thought his only recourse was to assault his sister. And of course, in his mind, he didn't think he was necessarily doing anything wrong because he had seen it.
Right.
And he had seen things that were sort of labeled as such. And we know on some of these sites that things that are labeled step-sibling abuse are some of the highest downloaded things.
And that concerns me. That concerns me. Yeah. We have got so much time together today. We're just going to wrap this segment up. We're going to come back in a couple of minutes. Before we go, our goal today is for people to educate themselves.
Yes.
Where are we sending them, Nancy? To your website?
Siblings2.com, yes.
And to TOO?
Yes.
Siblings2.com.
I leaned into, and I named it, the Me Too movement, because it was similar in that, like you said before, it's a taboo subject. Nobody wants to talk about it, and we need to. Yeah. And siblings are involved in this too.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. We're going to come back with Nancy Morris in a couple of minutes here on An Hour to Give and talk more about siblings too, more about sibling sexual abuse. And I'm hoping today that we're educating you. I'm hoping today that we've opened up your mind to hear about something that maybe wasn't on your radar. Stay with us on An Hour to Give.
This program is brought to you by Rogers Xfinity, connecting you to more of what you love. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Welcome to Community News and Events on Rogers TV, Channel 22. I'm Candace Knights. The Parkinson Canada Super Walk is the nation's largest fundraiser dedicated to supporting individuals living with Parkinson's disease. The Ottawa portion of this year's walk takes place on September 7th at Britannia Beach Lakeside Gardens. Check-in time is around 9 a.m., followed by a 10:30 a.m. start on a paved stroller and wheelchair-friendly 1 kilometer or 3 kilometer route. Funds raised support critical research, advocacy, and programs to enhance the quality of life for those affected by Parkinson's. To register or learn more, visit parkinson.ca, or you can show your support via donation or by volunteering. To have your community news or events listed on our website, please go to rogerstv.com, click on events, and post your event. That's it.
You're watching an interesting local show on Rogers TV and you want to know more. That's when you head to rogerstv.com. Our website provides more information about our programs, our hosts, our schedule, and about how you too can get involved with Rogers TV. Visit us online at rogerstv.com.
I'm Wendell Clark with a word about winning. We all know it takes a team effort in any sport and with any challenge. You can be a part of the winning team that shuts out impaired driving. Whether you're out on the town or just hanging out with friends, drink responsibly. Always have a plan for a safe ride home for yourself, your family, and your friends. You'll be helping to shut out impaired driving.
Visit ArriveAlive.org to find out more. Arrive Alive. Drive sober.
The following program addresses a topic which may be triggering to certain viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
We're back on An Hour to Give. I'm Sam Laprade. As we mentioned off the top of the show today, today's subject is challenging. It may be challenging for some of you to hear. It may be challenging for some of you to understand that this is happening in our community. We're going to get into some numbers in a few minutes with Nancy Morris, our guest today from Siblings 2, and they're probably going to surprise you. But I wanted to start off this segment, Nancy, really understanding your story, because I think, as I mentioned, I introduced you as one of the bravest women I know, and I stand by it, because I think there's a lot of people that have experienced this type of abuse and would never publicly talk about it. You decided to speak publicly about it to help others.
Yes.
So where do you want to start? Do you want to start when you realized it was going on, or years later? What's comfortable for you?
I realized something was wrong with what my brother was choosing to do. He would come into my room at night, because I had my own room, and he would come into my room at night. I don't recall any sort of sexual intercourse or anything like that, but I remember fondling and these sorts of things. I don't remember him ever saying anything. I don't remember anything like that. I do have flashbulb memories of other things, because we're talking about me when I was like 7. 6 or 7, so quite young. It wasn't all the time, but it was enough that I remember it.
Right.
It was enough that when I heard the footsteps coming down the hallway, I'd be like, oh, rats type thing in this little head. I came up with strategies for ways to get him to leave, and that was usually to pretend I was asleep and to protect my different body parts and things like that, which is a very common way we find in research for the person who's being harmed to try and deflect the person who wants to harm them. I never talked to him about it. I never spoke to anybody about it. It sort of went on for, again, I don't know for sure, but it would have been a few years until I got a little bit older. And I think until he got a little bit older too. And I was grateful that it stopped, but by that time the impact was already there. So, you know, I was a bit of a rebel when I was a teenager. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. But I know some of my behavior was because I was very confused. I had low self-esteem, low confidence, all of these sorts of things. I probably had variations of PTSD, which we know occurs in people who've been harmed, people who experience trauma. This is a form of trauma. It happens to be, you know, within a sibling relationship, but it's a form of trauma. And so my teen years were a bit rebellious, and as I got older, I drank a fair amount in my late teens and my early 20s. I always knew that it was wrong. But I had never heard anybody talk about anything other than incest, which in common language is adult to child within the family. Sibling sexual abuse is thought to be 3 to 5 times more prevalent than that.
Can you repeat that?
Sibling sexual abuse is thought in the research to be 3 to 5 times more prevalent than adult parent-to-child sexual abuse. Not adult to child, parent to child, intrafamilial sexual abuse.
So that will shock many people today.
It will shock many, many people because they don't think it happens, or they think it happens to, the person on the other side of the tracks or in a different socioeconomic status. And what I have in front of me here is a scoping review that was done, and a scoping review looks at hundreds, if not thousands, of different academic research papers done over many years. This was looking at papers over the course of 40 years and looking at sibling sexual abuse specifically to find out prevalence, impacts, all of these sorts of other things. And, it's in this research. We need to rely on this research to give us the right numbers, because then we can make better decisions about it. But it's shocking. And this is freely available. People can download it and get it from my website and stuff like that. But this is the thing. We don't want to be shocked. We want to be eager to learn. And that's why we're talking about education, right? Because this is known as the last taboo when it comes to sexual abuse. It's so difficult for people to talk about. And one of the reasons why is because there's a parent involved that loves two children.
Right.
One of the children has been harmed and needs parental support. One of the children has harmed and needs parental support. It rips families apart. So it's not just the children that we're talking about that are directly involved.
And the pressure on the couple, if there's a mother and a father in a situation, typically you'd see maybe somebody wanting to deal with it one way and somebody wanting to deal with it another way. Am I right on that?
You're 100% right on that. So, and I know quite a few couples that have divorced because they're struggling with this, or at least separated, or the marriage has sort of fizzled out. And they do have a very different way of dealing with it. But one of the ways that many people deal with it is deny it. I remember when I went to therapy when I was 20, and one of the instructions, or one of the things to do, was to start to talk to people about it in and close to my family. And at that time, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but what I was suggested is talk to people around the family and then get closer and closer inside the family. And as I started to do that, people started making really bad comments to me. So one adult that I spoke to, friends of my parents, said, well, boys will be boys. That'll shut you down pretty fast. For sure. Another person who was a friend of mine said, did you like it? That will shut you down really fast. And another person said, that couldn't have happened. He was probably just, blah, blah, blah. So it's these sorts of responses that will shut people down. So that's why this sort of conversation that we're having today is so important, because disclosure is a big hurdle. It's a very big hurdle.
And not to go back to B2 again, but the parallels, right?
Yes.
Are exactly the same. You think about, it's the denial, and that person couldn't have done it, and that, all of that is very, very parallel in experiences.
It is. And we also know from papers like this that the impacts, as I said before, there are impacts on the person who causes harm, but the person who is harmed. I mean, the impacts are just lifelong. And that's a significant thing to be thinking about here, because you're talking about a child interpreting what's happening to them and then carrying it themselves, thinking they are to blame, particularly if when they try and disclose, it's denied or shut down. And it's like, well, and quite often those who cause harm will suggest that it's their fault, or you can't tell mom and dad because they won't believe you, and these sorts of things. It's a little bit of the power dynamic that comes into play. So, again, it's very parallel to me too when it comes to, we're just going to deny everything and it's going to go away. One of the key differences, though, that we need to remember is that unlike other forms of sexual abuse, there is this very narrow gray area, which is normal sexual curiosity between similarly aged children. Right. So, but that is, it's so gray, but it's so narrow. But that is normal behavior that we wouldn't classify as abuse. Right. It's healthy.
Right.
And that's a sort of behavior of, you show me yours, I'll show you mine, we'll laugh, we'll say ick, we'll have a good day, and we'll just move on. And that sort of behavior should not be classified as abusive. But what happens, though, is if you try and explain anything outside of that, most adults think you're talking about normal sexual curiosity, and that's what they put it as. Or it's, as a step-parent myself, I would, if one of the kids came to me and said this had happened to me or whatever, that would be really hard to make sense of in my head, that something like that was going on with my one child who's been harmed and the one who's harmed. So I understand how parents may initially deny.
Well, also, I would think, and once again, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, that there would also be a lot of parental guilt because these 2 bedrooms are potentially down the hall from my bedroom. Where was I when this was happening? You know, maybe, we decided to have a couple of beers that night, and, you know, like I can just see like all of the kind of, you know, the guilt that the parents would put on themselves as well. So this is layers deep.
Yeah, and sometimes the parents have their own trauma that they need to, you know, that they need to resolve or to work through, because when something traumatic happens to a child, it will trigger the parent. And then their trauma responses start coming out.
Right.
So that's another factor as well. But yeah, the instant thing that happens for many parents is, you know, how did this happen? How did it happen on my watch? And what do I do? Because I love both my children. And I can't deny both my children. I've got one child saying this and another child saying that. What do I do? And think of the perspective that we have about this sort of behavior. In this community, in this society, we tend to think of it as this horrendous predatorial crime. So one hurdle a parent might need to get over, or in their head, it's not true, but get over in their head, is I've raised a predator.
Right. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, so that's like the instant thing that comes up, because you're hearing a child say something to you about sexual abuse, and you're thinking about something you've seen on the news about some adult who's harmed a child. And so you're thinking to yourself, how did I raise a predator? I mean, really, as parents, how often do we feel bad about what our kids are doing anyway? You know, like, what did I do that's happened? You know,
I always say for moms, that when they take out the placenta, they insert guilt. You just like have guilt for the rest of your life over
Pretty
everything.
Much, yeah.
But I think in terms of the education piece, like, you know, we always think about the conversations we have with children, and I think about the conversations I have with my daughter. One of the pieces of advice I was given is use the correct terminology for body parts in terms of any predatory behavior that would, God forbid, come her way, that using, as opposed to using nicknames that we hear about a lot. So that was advice I was given. What advice would you give to parents? Like, that if you have, and you've used a couple of age groups, so I'll just use them for ease, but, you know, a boy that's 12 and a girl that's 6. Are parents sitting down and having this conversation? No. So what's happening?
So sort of parents tend to follow the same education that schools might in sex education, where they're talking about stranger danger or weird uncle whoever, and they just follow that line. That is where you insert sort of conversations about consent, or it doesn't matter, you know, who the person is who may be touching you inappropriately. It doesn't matter who it is. It is okay to report that. You will be believed. And then the parent really needs to sort of understand themselves well enough to know when they're responding to trauma, perhaps inappropriately. You know, like, I get triggered sometimes where I'll get angry quite quickly. It just stuff. And I recognize some of my own triggers, not necessarily related to my history in that way, but just things that have happened in my life or trauma response or whatever. But I recognize that. I've done a lot of work over 40 odd years to recognize these things, and a lot of people don't do that or don't have that opportunity. So they knee-jerk respond to things. So it's about educating yourself, and particularly for parents right now, it's about understand some of these numbers. We're not talking about random 1 in 100 million people that this happens to. We're talking about, in this city, according to the statistics in the research, children right now that are either harming another sibling or being harmed by a sibling would fill the CTC center today.
Say that again.
The number of children who are directly involved in sibling sexual abuse in the city of Ottawa-Gatineau, in our population, based on the research that we have, we would fill the CTC center with those children. Actually, it would go over.
That is shocking to me.
And we believe it's a fairly conservative number because it's such underreporting, right? We know that from Me Too and all sorts of other stuff, and rapes and things like that. People don't report that. Sibling sexual abuse is rarely reported in childhood. It's almost always reported in adulthood. But more, because we're having these conversations now and research and stuff is getting into the community, more and more young people are able to report it.
I'll be honest, I need to digest that number for a minute. That's shocking to me. We're going to come back in a minute, Nancy. We've got so much to talk about. Nancy Morris is going to come back and speak to us more about siblings too and the education that we all need to do. Stay with us on An Hour to Give.
Welcome to Community News and Events on Rogers TV, Channel 22. I'm Josh Rackless. The Parkinson Canada Superwalk is the nation's largest fundraiser dedicated to supporting individuals living with Parkinson's disease. The Ottawa portion of this year's walk takes place on September 7th at Britannia Beach Lakeside Gardens. Check-in time is 9 a.m., followed by a 10:30 a.m. start on a paved, stroller and wheelchair-friendly 1 kilometer or 3 kilometer route. Funds raised support critical research, advocacy, and programs that enhance the quality of life for those affected by Parkinson's. To register or to learn more, visit parkinson.ca, or you can show your support via donation or by volunteering. To have your community news or events listed on our website, please go to rogerstv.com, click on events, and post your event. That's it.
Summer days, summer nights, lots of things to do, places to go, and people to see. If you're having a few drinks, be sure to plan ahead and get home safely. We don't want to pick you up. Drinking drivers risk injuries to themselves and others and take chances with their license, their jobs, and their future. Remember what's at stake and choose your ride, whether you're the driver, the passenger, or the party host. Thanks for supporting sober driving. I hope we never meet.
Visit arrivealive.org to find out more.
Hello, I'm Liz Dowdswell, Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. In 2008, carbon monoxide, a deadly invisible gas, killed an entire family in our province. That tragedy led to a new law requiring homes with potential CO sources to have alarms. John Gignac's family members passed away that day, and he shares his story to save others.
Please make sure you have working CO alarms in your home. Protect your family today.
The following program addresses a topic which may be triggering to certain viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Thank you so much for joining us on An Hour to Give. I'm Sam Laprade. As you know, we talk about some very difficult subjects sometimes on this show, and today is no different. We're speaking about sibling sexual abuse, and we're joined by Nancy Morris, and she's founded an organization called Siblings 2, and she is breaking barriers all over the place, and today is no different. Today is actually a very big day.
I think so.
We've talked about this for years, and today is the day. Today is the day. I want to, because so we've met on a number of occasions for the last number of years. I always walk away from you, though, feeling hopeful about this subject. And you have this way of talking about a very challenging subject, but also saying, Sam, there's ways we can help solve this. There's ways that we can help the community. So can we get into that? Because I need some hope today.
Yeah, for sure. And really there is. I mean, you know, for other types of sexual abuse situations, we always had a villain, or either an individual or an organization we could point to, right? Mm-hmm. So the Me Too movement had owners of big studios and people like that. And in the church, we had the leaders of the church, whether that was regionally or locally or whatever. So we always had people or organizations to point to. Well, we can't point to a 12-year-old and say you're a villain. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, as a survivor of abuse, I'm not happy with what my brother did and, you know, all these sorts of things. So I'm not saying what he did was okay. But what I am saying is I won't identify him as a villain. I won't sort of say that he is an abuser, a pedophile, or a predator, any of these sorts of things. So, you know, we really want to look at not comparing sibling sexual abuse to other forms of abuse. We need to look at the differences between the two so that we can find ways to be hopeful and that we can find ways to solve the problem. We don't have a villain here, except for we do. We do have a villain, but it's a societal villain. And that villain is lack of knowledge. Nobody wants to talk about this. I wouldn't even hazard to guess how many people have clicked this off since the first minute, because it's like sibling sexual abuse, oh no, click off. And it's because it's a very awkward topic to talk about. We have seen inappropriate representations of sibling sexual abuse in the media, in television shows and things like that. There's been some recent programs where it's kind of made fun of, or it's just turned into predator-only type conversations in some television shows. Wow. In the United Kingdom, there was a daily sort of soap opera show that actually did really, really good research. They had the storyline in the show. It caused an uproar in the UK. Social media went nuts when they introduced this storyline. But they did research, and I was part of one of the advisory committees to the group that advised the producers and stuff like that. They wanted knowledge. They wanted data. They wanted facts. They even spoke to the same gentleman I spoke to who had caused harm to his sister, so that they could have all of these different perspectives and come up with a narrative that was an appropriate narrative to give, rather than just some grandiose story. That storyline won an award in the UK in their recent television awards of that specific storyline, because they had done so much to be educated.
Right.
So the villain here to me is not a person or an organization, it's lack of knowledge. There's a lack of knowledge that parents have about sibling sexual abuse generally, and some of the factors that may contribute to it. So for example, if we take our 14-year-old child, boy or girl, it doesn't matter, we know in the research that both male and female perpetrate this behavior to both male and female. But if we take that child and then say, okay, we're putting you in a position of responsibility, you have the power. That's basically what we're saying. Well, sometimes that can be, funneled down to the younger children in inappropriate ways, right? So even some of these sort of factors, so the parents don't understand that A, this can happen, and some of the factors that are involved. The child who's being harmed is not taught in sex education that I know of anywhere. That, as I said before, it's not just stranger danger or weird relative cue, whatever, but it can also be a sibling. That's not told to that child. They're not, and as you were saying as well, quite often we don't use appropriate words, and we don't pay attention to these sorts of things. So that's a lack of knowledge. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that had I, way back when, in the 60s and 70s, ever heard somebody say, not just stranger danger, or weird relative, whatever, but maybe your brother or another family member, I may have gone to somebody. But because nobody spoke about it back then, I didn't have the knowledge that I wasn't the only one, and I wasn't the only one.
Right.
The child causing harm, so in the interviews that I've done, that person, the people that I've spoken to really demonstrate a lack of knowledge about the impacts of their behavior. So the gentleman I interviewed, Adam, on my podcast, he said, I didn't think she'd remember.
Interesting.
So I didn't think she'd know what was going on. I didn't think she'd understand. Of course she did, but he didn't think she would. He also didn't have the knowledge that any thoughts that he was having, or any desires or whatever it was, that was not necessarily his only option.
Right.
Right. So he didn't have knowledge. He didn't have education. He didn't understand all of these sorts of things. And society as a whole turns a blind eye to this. It really sort of like, or as I've seen in an American television show, they laugh at it, and sort of make a big joke out of this. So at all levels, the children directly involved, the other children in the family, the parents, the local community, and the broader society. Lack of knowledge is a villain in sibling sexual abuse. So it's not a deviant child, but a lack of knowledge that really impacts whether or not sibling sexual abuse is going to occur. And we don't, I think another thing I find really interesting that I haven't spoken to you about, though I've spoken to a lot of things about this, is that as parents, how often do we emphasize the importance of the sibling relationship to our children, because the sibling relationship is the longest relationship of your lifetime, good, bad, or ugly. It's the longest one you're going to have. And if siblings want to be abusive to each other, even if it's just sort of like bullying or whatever, that is impacting these lives for 70, 80, 90 years or more. And so how many times have parents disrespected their own siblings in front of their kids, for example? And this is just one aspect of something.
I never thought about that.
We don't really emphasize in our society the importance of the sibling relationship. Do you remember the television show The Waltons?
Yes, of
Okay,
course.
so the reason why I say that, I interviewed Cammie Cotler once, who played Elizabeth Walton, and we sort of talked about this, that was like sort of a fairy tale kind of family and stuff, but it was one of the reasons why it was really popular at that time is because it emphasized family.
Right.
It emphasized the siblings, and they didn't always get along, but they were, you know, squeaky clean and all that. But you know, they had a lot of fun and stuff together. But we don't really talk much as a family unit anymore about that respect between siblings. Even that, if you, as a parent, try to emphasize the importance of that sibling relationship and don't just say, oh, you know, that's antler tangling if the boys are play fighting or whatever. These sorts of things, these pieces of information, these little bits of knowledge that parents can acquire, for example, really has an impact. But like I say, for me, lack of knowledge is the #1 factor in sibling sexual abuse. Because people don't have knowledge of otherwise. They don't have education to go anywhere, go anywhere else or think of anything else.
What do we need from our policymakers?
Oh boy.
What do we need from the healthcare department? What do we need? What do we need?
Courage.
Courage.
We need you're not seeing a politician waving the flag on this one. You know, you're just not, because it's so difficult to manage. We need people to have courage and step forward and say, this happened to me. So I know of a really famous actor. I don't know if I can say this person's name on air, but she's put something in a book and has subsequently confirmed that in this book she was referring to sibling sexual abuse. It was one paragraph in her memoir. Now, I'm not pointing her out specifically, but we need people who understand this subject to say, I understand this subject. We need people that society look up to say, I understand this subject. So we need that, the people who can be activists. And then we need courage within those people who design sex education curriculum, who make public health policy to look at, you know, what are the factors that are public health factors in like brain development, the things we were talking about before. We need courage from the judicial system to look at some of the laws that we have around this type of behavior and not just blanket label everything sexual abuse and therefore a crime. Because as I mentioned earlier, in Australasia, they don't always look at the behavior as a crime. There's some that is for sure, but some of it is public health, and we approach it that way, and therefore, you know, we get the right resources to the right people. But there's nobody who's going to wave the flag and say, yes, let's invest a whole lot of money into this, even though they know the research. There was a document that was written by an organization in Canada back in 2008 that I found on a publicly available Canadian website called Sibling Sexual Abuse, A Parent's Guide. It's still available. It's very good, though some of the information's a little outdated, but it's still very good. I don't know a parent who's read it.
Right.
Even the researchers that I know had never heard of it, and they are the ones that can find pretty much anything. It's buried so deep that people can't find it. I happened to find it because I was researching it. I was digging.
Were they ticking a box that they had done something about this?
Possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly, and that's what we need is courage. That is a solution and a way forward for people, both those who have the audience, you know, the celebrities or the well-known people in our community to say, I understand what this is all about, and then the politicians, the local, municipal, regional, whatever, national, to say we need to do something about this because it is impacting tens of thousands of people today.
Absolutely. So much more to talk about. Nancy Morris, we've talked about so much today, but we're coming back to have a conversation with Nancy about siblings too, and potentially how you can get help if this has affected you in your life. Stay with us on An Hour to Give.
everybody. My name is Karen. I'm here with my best friends Shane and Monique. Join us on Rogers TV for Fitness Faction. Every week, we're going to take you through a full body workout. We've got strength training, we've got cardio, we've got HIIT. Ladies, let's get back into it.
I think we've got 10 more skaters. Let's go.
On the next Hour to Give, we're going to be talking about a challenging but important subject called sibling sexual abuse. Nancy Morris from Siblings 2 will join us. I hope you join us then. I'm Sam Laprade.
The following program addresses a topic which may be triggering to certain viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Today we're featuring Siblings 2, all about sibling sexual abuse here on An Hour to Give. I've learned so much, and I'm hoping we've educated you as well. One of the big reasons I wanted to speak with Nancy Morris today is to really get an understanding of the support that's available for people that have had this happen to them in their lifetime. Maybe they're experiencing it in their own family at this time. But Nancy is a wealth of information on how to provide support to people. Where can we guide people? Where are we sending people, Nancy?
I think that there is a lot of different resources that perhaps people don't realize. And one place that somebody can start is with their GP, because GPs understand broader places that can be resourced to get further information. If we're talking about parents who need some support with their kids, if they find something out, my first piece of advice is don't keep it to yourself, because ultimately you're going to destroy yourself or your family. I recognize how difficult disclosure is for a whole family, and I recognize that there are some hesitations about what's going to happen next. Are my children going to be taken away from me? You know, these sorts of things that cause the family to be very concerned. There are certain standards, there are certain things that those who provide support there may feel there are reasons for different things to happen, but still, to keep it within the family is very dangerous. So again, go to your GP, go to somebody that you trust, go to, look people up, because there are a lot of clinical psychologists and therapists and things who have different therapeutic techniques that can be very helpful to help a family figure things out. And you can also call the police. You can go to the police. Some people are very scared of that, and I understand that, but you can go to the police and they can get you on the right path. If you are an adult survivor or an adult perpetrator, I would look up a clinical psychologist, family therapist, other types of therapy. There are some really helpful therapeutic techniques, cognitive behavior therapy, EMDR, talk therapies, and if those don't feel great, then even art therapy has been shown to be helpful for people who are looking to move forward from this. We do recognize that social workers and others who work in this domain are not have all the information necessarily that they might want. So I am joining forces with Ottawa Victim Services and Counselling Family Services, who have received funding from Canada's Department of Justice to put on a webinar series, which are actually starting later this month, and people can go to my website. The first webinar is designed for professionals who work with children about sibling sexual abuse. The second webinar is for professionals who work with adults. And the third webinar is more this type of conversation for the general public, the media, parents generally. That said, I know that in the first webinar, we have people from all over the place who are registered for this, who aren't professionals working with kids. They're survivors who want to hear more information, for example.
So it doesn't matter, they can.
It doesn't matter, anybody can come along, and it's free.
Right.
It's absolutely free, and if people register, they'll get a copy of it afterwards as well, so they can refer to it. There'll be a lot of resources shared at that time. It's throughout each of the webinars as well. My website has resources as well. SiblingSexualTrauma.com is a website that is just an abundance of information. It's originates out of the United States, but they have international information as well. It's a very useful tool for people who are just looking, who aren't ready to make those phone calls yet. So whether that's a parent or a child, a younger person or an adult survivor or somebody who caused harm, that website has an abundance of information as well. Disclosure is difficult. I've received a lot of emails, even recently, when people became aware that I was going to be here today, talking about how, I haven't told anybody, or it's a whisper amongst friends, or, dear friends and things like that. And that's just so sad, because, we need to deal with these abuses, because the abuse itself is horrendous. The long-term impacts of it create the trauma, and the trauma just lasts and lasts, and it impacts so many other people. We haven't even talked about the impacts of the siblings who aren't involved.
True.
And there's lots of evidence to show that they're impacted as well. We only touched on the impacts on the parents, whether it's a couple or a single parent. We haven't even spoken about that. The impacts are wide-reaching. So, but to try and squash it and say, no, this never happened, is really causing further damage. And it's unfortunate when, again, education and resources and people saying, yes, this is occurring in our society to the tune of tens of thousands of people, like I said, CTC Center and into the parking lot, and that's right now. Over the course of my lifetime in Ottawa, that number, because it rotates every 10 to 12 years, we're talking over 100,000 children in Ottawa-Gatineau, which are now adults. So, as I mentioned earlier, I was collecting these narratives, right? I have hundreds of narratives from around the world of people just desperate to tell people that this either happened to them or that they caused harm to another person. And so finding that path, whether it's to go to your GP, go to social services, we have a great family social services center, people here, going to these different places and just, start to deal with the situation and just try not to push it away, because it won't go away.
And I think, as we've mentioned, today is really groundbreaking. I don't know of any other sort of public conversation that's taken place in this community on this. You and I spoke briefly on the radio once, but it was maybe a tenth of what we've done today.
Yeah.
So I think today is really groundbreaking. If somebody's watching today and they want to reach out to you, are you open to that, Nancy? Does it impact you to have all these conversations? Is it hard on you? I think about the term compassion fatigue. Is it tiring for you, or does it spur you on to do even more and try and spread the message more?
Well, that's a great question. I appreciate you asking it. A lot of people reach out to me already. I can't answer every single email that I get, because I not only get so much, but I am trained to, I have a master's in applied positive psychology and, previous education in counseling psychology, but I can't give advice over email. I'm only ever going to direct people. I'll hear what they're saying, and I'll, have compassion for that. And if I can, I respond. But I'll always direct people to other resources who can work with them more closely than I can. But if people have general questions and stuff, I already get those. And no, I think it's because of the work that I do that I'm now, I've done a lot of work myself over the years, as I've said, in my healing and in my growth. And it spurs me on to keep doing this. It's not unrealistic to say that there have been times over the last few years that I've thought, I'm going to pull the plug, I'm not doing this anymore. It's not easy work. But when I interview people on my podcast, or when I have an opportunity to do something like this, it really reminds me about why I'm doing this, and that's to kill off the villain. My colleagues and my peers around the world, I always used to say, you know, once the genie is fat enough and we can't get her back in the bottle, then our work will be done. Because what's happened in the past is people start talking about this subject, it becomes too difficult, and then it goes away for 10 or 15 years. Well, now myself and other people who are adult survivors and who have been disclosing in magazines, and there's a TED Talk and, you know, all these sorts of things. The genie's nice and fat now. She's not going back in the bottle. We have to deal with this. But it spurs me on when people, one story in particular, you might get me going now, is somebody wrote to me and said, and I've actually had a few of these, but one in particular stands out, and she said, I was desperate. You know, she had been a survivor. She said, I was desperate. And I came across your podcast, and I binge listened this weekend, and I didn't kill myself. So I get messages like that, similar to that from time to time, about how much what I'm doing helps people. If people, you know, yeah, send me those messages. I love them. They keep me going. But I can't reply to everybody. But yeah, if I can redirect people anywhere, people can go to siblings2.com and find links to different resources. And again, the other websites that I've mentioned, for sure. Yeah, I don't want anybody to think that they can't reach out. Right. Just I can't answer everybody.
Well, I would think, I mean, and you also have a full-time job.
I do, yeah.
Right? So yeah, it's definitely a lot. I'm so grateful, Nancy, that you would share this message. We only have a couple of minutes. I cannot believe how fast this time has gone.
It has gone fast. Yeah.
What message would you send somebody today that is really feeling alone, and they're maybe hearing this for the first time, and they're wanting to take a next step, just a small one, going to your website, or speaking to somebody, speaking to a counselor, sharing with a spouse, a trusted friend?
Exactly.
What advice would you give?
To do exactly that. And I would also give them the advice to have low expectations of people you disclose to. And the reason why I say that is because most people don't know how to respond to this. So the journey of disclosure, when we disclose, we tend to, if I was disclosing to you, I inadvertently may want you to fix everything or, you know, really see me. And we all know that communication is not great at the best of times. So if we disclose, understand that the person may not reply the way that you actually want them to, but in the disclosure, the healing begins. Healing can happen without disclosure, okay? It can. That said, it can happen faster and stronger and more confidently with disclosure, even if the only person you disclose to is a spouse or a therapist.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me and for being willing to have this conversation. It's not an easy one, and it's not one that media likes to jump all over, so it's great that you allowed me to come.
I think we broke some barriers today.
Yes.
Thank you. Nancy Morris sharing her story today about Siblings 2. She's directed you to her website, siblings2.ca. Is it .ca or .com? Siblings2.com is where you're going to find all that information. And it's been a pleasure to spend time with Nancy. And I'm hoping today that we've also helped to educate you. My name is Sam Laprade, and this is An Hour to Give.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
Join Valerie Pringle as she interviews some of the country's most prominent insiders on Canada Files, this season on Rogers TV.
For 25 years, you've been helping to make our roads safer by doing the right thing. You've been the designated driver, you've stayed over, called home, you've called a cab or a friend, and planned ahead. Let's keep doing the right thing. Support sober driving by getting yourself and your friends home safely.